Hi, this is Mr. Wartsky again, and this is the fourth screencast of the Energy series. This was the last slide that you saw before from the last screencast, which went over the electron transport chain. And remember, the electron transport chain, the proteins pass electrons to other proteins with the movement of hydrogen ions from the matrix to the inner membrane space. And why do you do that? To set up a hydrogen ion concentration. Remember, the hydrogen ions want to move back into the matrix, but they cannot. So here is a diagram of the electron transport chain. It looks really confusing, doesn't it? But the thing that you have to remember is that the NAD right here passes the electrons to FMN, which passes them all the way down here to set up a hydrogen ion concentration. Right here we have at least 3 places where the hydrogen ions are moved. Okay? And they have to move back through a protein called ATP synthase. So here's another diagram. The citric acid cycle here, right? That happens in here. The Krebs cycle in here. We're moving, passing the NADs, passing the electrons to the proteins here. There's Q, the cytochrome C. We have oxygen accepting the last electrons here, producing water. Sometimes you can produce hydroxyl free radicals, which are bad. And that's the case. The hydrogen ions are moved out here, and eventually they'll move back into the matrix through ATP synthase. And here's another one. Oh my gosh, there's so many diagrams. Which one do you like? Probably the simplest one, huh? Okay, we have all these hydrogen ions out here. Want to move back inside there. Good. So oxidative phosphorylation is the very last step of the aerobic respiration process, or Ox Phos to you and me. Hydrogen ions move through ATP synthase back into the matrix, which will produce ATP, because as the hydrogen ions move through ATP synthase, it turns it in a clockwise fashion, which forces the phosphate onto the ADP to form ATP. So for each NADH, you produce 3 ATP molecules. For each FADH2, you produce 2 ATP molecules. It's one of those things you have to accept. I don't know how they figured it out, but they did. So there are 34 ATPs produced in the oxidative phosphorylation. You add that to the 4 ATPs already produced, and you get a grand total of 38 ATPs. Now remember, each ATP when you break the phosphate, releases 7.3 kcals of energy. Glucose has 686 kcals of energy in the molecule. That's the potential energy. And you end up with 38 ATPs, and you multiply it by 7.3, and you end up with 277.4 kcals of energy you actually retrieve from the glucose. And you're thinking to yourself, that's really bad. That's only 40% efficient. Well, that's really good, actually. And the other potential energy is lost as heat. So when we produce energy, we get warmer. Okay, so in the wintertime, when we need to stay warm, we need to produce more energy to stay warmer. Thinking? Hopefully. So we've talked about how carbohydrates are used as energy. And in fact, the monosaccharides the starches are broken down into glucose molecules, which enter our cells and start the whole process of glycolysis, and they produce energy. So carbohydrates are easy. Fats, well, the fatty acids, we split them into glycerol and fatty acid. The glycerol is 3 carbons, and that enters glycolysis as glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. The fatty acids, they're really long, right? Long fatty acids. They're cut into 2 carbon sections, and they enter the Krebs cycle as acetyl-CoA. And since there's so many carbons, fats can provide you with so much energy, and that's why they give you 9 kcals of energy per gram. Whereas carbs, a little more simple, they'll give you 4 kcals of energy per gram. Proteins are cut into dipeptides. Di means 2 carbons, and they enter the Krebs cycle. But you hope to never use proteins for energy, because that means that you use all the carbs and all the fats, and they're broken down: carbs first, fat second, proteins third or last. So you use up all the carbs first, use up all the fat second, and then you go to proteins. But you never do want to use proteins. So exercise. If you use heavy exercise, you increase your lung volume. Why? Because you take in more oxygen. Your heart gets stronger so it can move blood that carries the oxygen to your cells faster. You increase blood vessel growth to the muscles so you can carry more oxygen and take away more waste as time goes on, and you redistribute fat and glycogen. Fat, why? Because you want to move the fat molecules and the glycogen to the areas of the muscles that need the energy. Now, there will be times when you cannot take in enough oxygen for exercise and you will undergo anaerobic respiration. When that happens, you produce lactic acid. You do not produce ethanol. You produce lactic acid and you feel the burn. If you add oxygen to lactic acid, it changes back to pyruvate. And it goes right back into oxidative decarboxylation. Now, lactic acid can be taken to the liver to produce glucose, but you have to get the lactic acid in the blood to the liver to produce glucose. That's why you need to walk around, give yourself a massage, work that lactic acid out, put it into the blood, and take it to the liver. Now, as you exercise and you undergo anaerobic respiration and produce lactic acid, the hemoglobin that passes by the muscle, the red blood cells that pass by the muscles there, will encounter a decrease in pH. When it encounters the decrease in pH, the hemoglobin will change shape. As the hemoglobin changes shape, it drops the oxygen that it was carrying into the muscles that are undergoing anaerobic respiration. The introduction of oxygen will all of a sudden change it from anaerobic respiration to aerobic respiration. So I think that is one of the neatest systems of ensuring that the muscles that need the oxygen get the oxygen. Of course, that is predicated on the fact that you have enough lung volume as well as heart strength to move the blood cells to all the areas of the body that need the oxygen. So when you hit the wall, as runners sometimes do, that means you have no more carbohydrates left. You've broken down all the fats, because if you look at marathon runners, there's not a lot of fat on those people. And you start breaking down proteins, and that's bad. Bad, bad, bad. Because your heart's a protein, your brain's a protein, muscles are proteins. You never want to do that. Okay? Good. That's why people before races and big matches carbo load. They take in as much carbohydrates as they can so that they use that to aerobic respiration to produce energy. Oh, and that is it for energy. If you have any questions, please don't be afraid to ask, or watch the video again, or read your textbook. Have a good night.